Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be reviewing episode 10 of Titans Season 4, Game Over. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I post film, book, and movie reviews. I do opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. To this date, I've released 3 books: The Women in White, The Lethal List, and most recently, Textbook Murder. They're all on sale now, and there are purchase links in my video description below. With that in mind, and without further ado, welcome to my spoiler-filled review of Titans Season 4, Episode 10, Game Over. With help from Connor at LexCorp, Sebastian manifests his powers in a sinister new way as Dick and Rachel have a close encounter with black magic. So I'm just going to come out and say this, I did not like this episode even a little. Coming off of the amazing episode that was Dude, Where's My Gar, and considering that this was the first of the last 3 episodes of Titans Season 4, I really was expecting this episode to be a focused and sensible and well-directed first step in the final countdown, but as has happened almost every time since Season 1, when I approached Titans with any level of faith for greater things, I was let down in ways I hardly even knew I could be. For the sake of clarity, I'll break down my very long list of criticisms in the order that they arose. So, the mechanics with the Doom Patrol were very weird this week. It's never explicitly stated, but it's heavily implied that the Robot Man, Cyborg, and Negative Man featured in this episode are from the Titans universe, not the universe associated with the Doom Patrol TV show, because Beast Boy seems to know this Robot Man and Negative Man, and vice versa. And it's implied that Cyborg is a new addition to their team who came after Beast Boy left. And that's fine, I guess. But their entire inclusion just added more mystery to things than I felt was warranted. Like, where's Elastigirl or the Chief? It would have been nice to see Gar finally get some closure with the Chief in particular after the reveals from last episode. Why were certain members of the Doom Patrol even trapped in the red with Gar in the first place? Like, there was literally zero explanation for any of that. Also, I'm just tossing this out there, and others may feel differently, but the whole semi-crush between Cyborg and Corey just made me roll my eyes. Maybe if something like this had been done earlier in this show's run, like in season 2 or 1 or something like that, I'd have felt differently, but it just seems like a pointlessly dramatic waste of time by this point. We already know Corey and Dick are in-game by now. And even if we didn't, it's way too late in this season's plot to divert yet more attention from an already unfocused narrative to teases of romantic tension that we all know will probably go nowhere. The entire Red plot this week was basically a massive head scratcher. Why was Gar unable to escape the house where he was trapped and travel back into the multiverse or the Red like he did so many times at the end of last episode once he learned about his powers? There was literally no explanation for that beyond that the plot called for it. It's hard for me to even fathom the buffoonery near the end with how Gar and Corey and the Doom Patrol had to escape the house before they were crushed to their deaths. It just made zero sense, and it was hard to see any real lesson that the Red might have been trying to teach them through that experience. Also, the plotline with how the Red was apparently trying to teach Corey not to hate Sebastian just fell flat to me because it came out of nowhere. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this never seemed like a problem for her until now, her hatred of Sebastian. It felt like an afterthought manufactured just to give her a reason to be trapped in the Red with Gar and the Doom Patrol for this episode. Connor's Luthor Corp takeover plot this week literally kicked open the door to the absurd and dragged it kicking and screaming inside. After quitting the Titans during the Cause Folly 2-parter to find his own way of stopping Sebastian and May, Connor approaches Sebastian this episode with the idea of helping him release his game worldwide to change the world for the better. The whole thing is his way of buttering Sebastian up into abandoning his plans with May and accepting Connor as an ally until Connor can find a way to destroy Trigon's horn and kill Sebastian himself. Which, that's a reasonable plan on Connor's part, but on a storytelling level, it fails completely in execution. The whole plot revolves around Connor's taking over Luthor Corp and using the company as a medium to release Sebastian's game worldwide, but it is impossible to perform a corporate takeover on a company as large as Luthor Corp is implied to be as fast as Connor did it in this episode. And it's even more impossible to release and hype up a game like Sebastian's on a global level just as fast. And even if it weren't, I have a very hard time believing that anyone at Luthor Corp would be okay with having Connor act in an authoritarian capacity there, given the negative PR associated with his suspicion of murdering Lex Luthor earlier this season. For that matter, how would Connor even form a legitimate case for taking over the company legally? Does he own enough stock in Luthor Corp to take it over? Did the board of directors vote him in? Did Lex somehow arrange things so that Connor could take over in the event of Lex's own death? Just, God, the absurdity never ends there. During the Call's Folly two-parter, it was stated that Mae Bennett's cultists have since Lex Luthor's death taken over Luthor Corp and are in control of it now, which just makes it even more unlikely that a Titan would ever be allowed to control that company. But that entire idea seems to be completely overstepped during this episode as Connor takes over Luthor Corp in what feels like 5 minutes without one iota of protest or pushback from the powers that be. Now, yeah, we are conveniently left in the dark to some degree regarding this episode's timeline. It's never explicitly stated how long after the Call's Folly two-parter or Dude, Where's My Gar it takes place. So it is possible, but not probable, that this episode takes place a great while later, like maybe a few months later or something like that, which that might have given Connor more time to enact his own corporate takeover, but that explanation still feels like a major reach and a butt pull at best. Also majorly lacking was Sebastian's subplot this week. The last time we saw him, which was in the Call's Folly two-parter, he was basically in full-on brother blood mode, fully aligned with May and ready to kill his own half-sister just to be rid of all personal weakness. Well, his storyline this week basically undid all of that. The biggest and most glaring failure of his storyline this week is why he hasn't yet blown Trigon's horn to summon Trigon back to Earth already. Why he didn't do it during the Call's Folly two-parter, why he and May actually needed to wait this long. Seriously, this episode and its focus on Sebastian's essential reversion to the dopey, aspiring game designer from earlier this season just feels like a silly and stupid way to stall the final battle with Trigon and the Church of Blood that we should be getting by now in the literal last 3 episodes of the season and the series. Also, this is kind of a minor nitpick with Sebastian's whole game storyline this week and the damage that it did to victims, but why on earth was Bernard, after being injured, kept for treatment on some little table in Star Labs and left alone, hooked up to a few tubes, instead of being sent to, I don't know, the hospital? I know the writers would probably argue that Star Labs has more advanced equipment and possibly could take better care of him, but that's just not the image that was presented in this story. He wasn't seen surrounded by the best equipment in the world and the best staff on the planet. He was portrayed on one small table in an empty room and with minimum equipment around to monitor him. In context, it made no sense to me. Last but definitely not least disappointing was the subplot involving Rachel. This plot makes negative sense and has since it was introduced in the Call's Folly two-parter. How is it that Sebastian is connected to Rachel such that her death means his death? How is it that Sebastian loses all his power at the end of the episode just because Rachel's dark side was essentially killed off by Dick? At one point in this episode, Rachel states her own belief that those dark connection rules between her and Sebastian only applied in Call's Folly but there's no evidence to suggest that, and even less to suggest that keeping Rachel separate from Sebastian or uninvolved in plans to stop him would obviate his parasitic effects on her, as Dick suggests at one point during this episode. Also, again, just to state the obvious, it is ridiculous that this whole dark magic cure retcon for Rachel didn't exist in season 1. It's implied, if not outrightly stated, that Dick at least knew about this whole black magic out of doing a spell to manifest then kill off Rachel's dark side for quite some time, possibly even during the season 1 timeline. So it makes negative sense that he wouldn't even have mentioned it in story during season 1 or even during season 2, when Rachel basically hated herself because of her powers and probably would have jumped at the chance to get rid of those powers at the time. It's sloppy writing all around. Also, final side tangent, but Mae Bennett's character this week was also grossly inconsistent with her portrayal up until now. The way she demeans and belittles Sebastian at the top of this episode is just so inconsistent with her courting him to the dark side earlier in this series, and there doesn't seem to be any reason for it. Yes, you could argue that she's showing her true colors now that she's on the verge of getting what she wants by having Sebastian to summon Trigon. But still, even then, why wouldn't she want to continue playing nice until she coaxed Sebastian into actually summoning Trigon? At which point he would be of no further use to her and she'd be able to treat him however she liked. Her mistreatment of him really did just feel like a plot contrivance on the part of the writers so that they could have Sebastian to kill her in the most anticlimactic and overplayed way possible, so Sebastian could temporarily work with Connor and so that this episode could even happen. Then, of course, the writers just made it worse with an attempt to have their cake and eat it too by revealing at the very end that Mae is indeed still alive. I give Titans Season 4, Episode 10, Game Over, 1.5 Cronuts out of 5. And that's being generous. Very generous. At any rate, let me know what you all think about this episode. Sound off in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, follow me on social media as well. So long.